We're live.
Okay, I will call the City of Salem Bond Oversight Committee meeting to order. Take roll. Member Herron, present. Member Courtright, present.
Member Tigan, present.
Member Brown, present.
We didn't pick up Paul's or Councilor Tigan's microphone.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
There it is.
Okay, I'm present as the alternate.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we have quorum. Chance to review the minutes from the March 27th, 2025 meeting. I'll entertain a motion to approve or questions.
So move.
Second. All in favor? Aye.
Um,
Carries. All right. Public comment. Do we have anybody? Nobody on tap for public comment. Okay. No action items, no new items. Let's go straight to management update. Information items, beginning with Mr. Alan Dannon.
Great, thank you. So what I wanted to do today is go over bid results that we received so far for bond projects in 2025. And do you have that
Yes, I
sheet to share,
do.
Kelly?
There we go.
Great, thank you. So just a quick kind of rundown and a reminder of what these projects are. So starting with, well, maybe just to back up. The good news here is we've had very favorable bidding through this early bid season, and not just on the bond projects, but on several others that are funded elsewhere. So that's been encouraging, and hopefully that continues. So just to kind of run down each one of these and a reminder of what they are. The bridge strengthening project is rehab that we're doing on 4 bridges, 3 over Mill Creek and 1 at Mission over Pringle Creek, where we're going to be able to remove the load rating on those, so we will move the restriction for bigger trucks to cross those bridges. That project bid early this year. Due to the specialized work, we only got a couple of bidders there, but still came in about 80,000 under budget, under our estimates. So good. That work should kick off very soon, actually. HP Civil and to start. I'm not sure which bridge they're going to start on, but there'll be information going out to the public to notify them when it's happening. Shouldn't be much traffic impact because most of the work happens from underneath. The Gilchrist Phase 2 is the big one. This got mentioned at Budget Committee last night. So this is the segment of the project from 22nd to 25th. That work is underway, but we got a lot of bids on that project. Very competitive bidding, and the low bid was almost 3 million, or just over 3 million below by most AM. So that was kind of surprising to see such good numbers we saw on the big ticket items like asphalt and concrete. Saw bid prices that we hadn't seen in a while. So good news there. We didn't take those numbers for gospel on future estimates, but we did fine tune some of our estimating for these projects that are still in the hopper to revise a little bit to get a better sense of where we are. That project, as I mentioned, is underway. Franchise utility relocation is wrapping up, and I think they've started the closure out there. So it's eastbound traffic is closed, and westbound traffic is open. Question from Councilor Tigan.
Yeah, thank you. Alan, are you seeing, do you have a bid breakdown to figure out where exactly the differentiation is between what the city estimated and what the bids are coming in on? So is it a particular type of material? Is it the labor? What do you think do you have a way to estimate or understand where the difference is?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So our bids are broken down typically by the different types of work that are happening. So an example is like tons of asphalt pavement that are being laid down, or square feet of concrete that are being installed. In some cases, it might be lump sum items like traffic control, right? So the amount of effort that goes into that. So it depends, and so it's not easy to see how the contractor is looking at it in terms of labor or materials. But what we did see on that particular bid is kind of across the board numbers below our estimates. So I think what it indicated to us, again, we also had like 10 bidders. So it indicated to us that it was an attractive project, had a good time of year, and folks wanted that work. I think what I have heard in talking with contractors and our folks that are talking with contractors is our concerns about material price impacts from tariffs and things like that haven't really manifested yet because a lot of the contractors' price is still in labor. And so if they want the work, they're finding ways to absorb those impacts or those risks and still bid competitively. So I don't, sorry, I don't have a more specific answer.
No, I appreciate it. I mean, I think the fact that you've got, 10 bidders to begin with. I mean, I've certainly tried to go out to contract on in my own work in the past where, you only have one person show up or you only have a couple bidders show up. So to have 10 submit bids is a great sign.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I would just add, I mean, a year or two ago, we were having exactly what you mentioned, Counselor, where we'd only get one or two bidders on some of these projects. So yeah, the things have changed here recently.
Counselor Brown?
Thank you, Director Dannon. So I think you just answered the question, but mine was in regards to tariffs. And I know we can't solidify those numbers now, or can we?
I think it's pretty uncertain, right? And like I mentioned, so it depends on how the contractors' portfolios are filling up for the summer and how much risk they want to take or not take. As so far, we're seeing that they're willing to sort of take on that risk because we're having good competitive results. I think the areas where we're especially vulnerable are steel, and so that doesn't impact us a ton, except where there's reinforcement going in, like reinforced concrete and that kind of thing. So we don't have a lot of that. The other areas where I think we see impact is Portland cement that makes the concrete and traffic signal components. So those are the areas we're at risk, but so far have not seen significant impacts.
Hey, and thank you for that update. And so I'm assuming as we meet throughout the year, and let's suppose something, the bottom drops out in midsummer. Is that something that you will let us know if you need support on, or what do we do in the meantime?
Yeah, that's exactly right. We'll monitor the situation. We'll keep bringing back bid results for the projects that are forthcoming. And if there's any impact in a project where a contractor comes to us and says, "Hey, we had this tariff impact and prices went up 200% or something like that," I think we'll probably typically be able to. First, they're under contract, right? So there's that piece of it. But if it's something they couldn't have foreseen and they're due a change and we work through that process, my guess is we'll be able to manage it with the contingency and the differences that we're showing here. But if it did go so severely that we needed help, then we would come to this group and say, "Hey, this project is having these problems for these reasons, and we might need to do something about it." I don't anticipate that right now, but you never know.
Okay, thanks, Director.
Yeah, that's a good point. So we have two more projects at the bottom of this list that haven't bid yet, and then it'll be late in 20. I think we have a couple of projects planned to bid later this year, and then into this winter and spring period of 26, where that's where we try to do most of our bidding because that's where contractors are trying to fill up their workload for the summer. So Courtney's correct in suggesting that by this time next year, the picture could change quite a bit. So we'll just keep monitoring that.
Two questions on the McGilchrist project. So there's a $3 million delta. At what point do we say, okay, we now potentially have $3 million to do something else?
Right.
I know there's contingency and everything else in that project. I don't remember the timeline for that phase. It's probably a year plus.
End of this year is when it should be done. Okay. One other thing to remember about that project and the Liberty Davis Signal project is it's not fully bond funded. So there's government renewal and federal funding in there too. And our strategy is to try to spend the other funding sources all the way down, right? Because the federal grants are for this project. The urban renewal money is basically for this project. So we try to prioritize bond savings. So we'll start to have a better feel for that as we get through the risk of this project, towards this fall and winter, of how this one's closing out and where we're at for this project. And then there's phase 3, right?
Yeah.
That has lots of complicated pieces to it. So that's, I think, the way I look at this one and trying to kind of keep it all together as a package. I think there's probably a bigger discussion to have as some of these start to close out toward the end of this year of, if we are starting to see some savings, how do we want to approach that? Do you want to add anything there, Josh?
Yeah, I think the thing to remember is we're 2 years into a 10-year program, right? So we have a lot of uncertainty. We're talking about tariffs, but who knows what the next thing is in 2 years or so. So I think we want to hedge a little bit, make sure we don't count things before they hatch. But we do have a policy discussion coming to talk about what we want to do, because even with these lower rates, there's still quite a few projects where even now the engineer's estimate is over what we thought it would be. So what do we do for those projects? And what do we do with bond premium, interest earnings? We want to bring that back to this body to have that policy discussion, because it is timely. There will be requests for additional funding for certain projects, to meet the scope or opportunities or things like that. So how do we want to handle those requests?
Well, I wanted to say, and I hope we all say, this is great news.
Yeah.
It's wonderful. I mean, usually you walk into these meetings expecting, we're going to see bids that are slightly higher than what we estimated, and things aren't in our control. So let's celebrate the moment and the
The win.
situation that we're in. I appreciate Josh's comment and, the thinking forward. One of the things I think about is, and I'm sure we all experience this, is this cycle is cyclical. I mean, we have opportunities where bids are lower than we expect. I'd ask, and are we prepared to advance other projects? I see the ones that are in the list next, but I mean, if we were in the opposite situation, we would be thinking about slowing things down. If we have the opportunity and the market is conducive to building things and doing bids, I wonder, are we in a position to accelerate and get projects delivered more quickly than we expected?
It's a really good question.
Yeah, it is a good question. And one example of where we are doing that is the last project here on the list. So the Silverton Road project is actually, it says 2025 R&R, but it's stretching out through 2026. And so we did some checking with local contractors as we're pulling this package together. Does it make sense to bid it in June, knowing that the work continues on, or should we hold off because that's when contractors are bid, and they may not have the focus to put on the bid? And what we heard was, yeah, that's attractive to us because it's gonna be winter work and into next year, and we would like to lock that down. And so we kind of pushed the gas on the design to make sure that we got it out. That was probably the exception to the rule. A lot of the other projects we're still working through permitting and everything else, but I think we'll look for those opportunities.
Yeah, I mean, I know you have a full plate to deliver the projects that you're on, but it's always nice to strike when the iron's hot.
Yes, makes good sense.
Councilor Brown, do you have another question?
I do. I'm all about the acceleration of projects. I guess my one concern or question is, how much of the funds that we are relying upon, how much is that federal?
Good question. So I think that's a later agenda item as well, but there's
Oh,
basically
perfect.
there's two projects in the bond program that have federal funding. One is McGilchrist, which we just mentioned, and the other one is the Pringle Path improvements between
Mhm.
Deer Civic and Riverfront Park. Those both have federal grants. The rest of the bond program is funded from bond proceeds, and then in rare cases, some other city funding.
Right, and I appreciate that. I'm not trying to jump the agenda. The only reason I ask is because there are some municipalities that have had their funds clawed back, only because they are looking at the word urban as DEI. And so they've gone in and they've taken those funds back. So I'm just raising a level of awareness and concern. So just in case, that's why I'm asking.
Yeah, it makes sense. And I'll touch on that a little bit on how we proceed and don't proceed on those projects when we get to that.
I have
Okay,
one-
thank you.
Sorry, I have one other question. It's about the Gear Park and Silverton Road. Make me think about it. How far out from bid date are you done in the engineering department, finalize your estimate and get your bid documents out? So we kind of know, like, if it's like 7 or 8 months, that's a big window for a lot of things to change.
Yeah.
Right, and so just as a committee, we have an idea of like how many projects may have been sent out to bid that things have drastically changed in that period.
Right. Good question. So typically we advertise for bids about 4 weeks, a month before this date here.
Okay.
So the Gear Park project is. That will be maybe doing it 3 weeks. I don't think I've seen the plans on it yet. But to your question, final plans and the final estimate all get developed or refreshed right at the end of that period before it's advertised. So we take a fresh look at it.
Probably depends on scale of the project. that kind of
Correct,
thing.
yeah, correct. But yeah, one of the last things we do is the final estimate, and that's how we put together our, do we go to bid or don't we? Do we think we have enough money to bid this job? So we take one last look at it. Okay. So that is Gear Park. We mentioned Silverton Road and what's happening there. Just to round out the other projects on the list. So the Liberty Davis signal, as a reminder, that's the one end of the Davis Road improvement project that's in the bond where we advanced it to pick up the signal requirement. So there are some SBC funds in that project, and that work is going to kick off this summer so that we can do a lot of the work while school's out right there next to Crossler. It'll continue into the spring, but that one came in very competitively as well. The sports courts rehabs at 3 parks this time, so it's Morningside, Hoover, and one other that I can't remember right now.
Highland?
Yes, Highland. Thank you.
That was pretty good.
Another good bid there.
Eric.
400,000 under almost. And that work is kicking off quickly here as well. So that hopefully we can get that resurfacing done during the dry weather time. And then the playground replacement, we're doing 2 playgrounds, and I'll look instead of guessing this time.
So I think it might be
Livingston,
Sumter. Hoover, Morningside, and Sumter.
no, we did Sumter last year. Yeah, Highland, Hoover, and Morningside for sports courts, and Livingston and Morningside for playgrounds. So a lot going on in Morningside. And that work will all go this summer as well. This number does it for playground replacement. This is the actual work of the contractor. We acquire the playground equipment because it's specialized through separate contract through vendors who provide that equipment. And so those costs are on top of the 400,000 that you see here for
So that's for three playgrounds.
2 playgrounds.
2 playgrounds.
Labor for 2. And then Riverfront Park, where we have a grant to do some expansion to that play area, is following on next summer. And that's all I just wanted to share. Just kind of give you all an update on how things are going, share the good news as Bob mentioned, and happy to answer any other questions, or we can move on.
Any other questions?
Can I just ask about that, the Davis Liberty signal? I'm trying to remember, was there a fatality? Was it at that intersection, or was it not Mildred and Liberty? Just like right down the street from there.
Yes, the fatality accident occurred at Mildred and Liberty. There is a signal in the works for that intersection as well. That one is being funded and constructed by private development. I know the signal plans have been in for review a couple times, so they are very close. And that completion of that signal is tied to occupancy of the next phase of apartments up there off of Mildred.
Yeah.
So it is, we can't say for sure what the developer's timeframe is, but they won't be allowed to have anybody move into those apartments until that signal is done. So I'm hopeful that it'll be done in the next year or two.
Just note, I mean, I only go to so many meetings a week, but this one's been pretty thick. And I think this is like the fifth project that has been sort of like fatality like adjacent that has come across my Zoom screen this week. So I just, we had that conversation, yesterday, I think Manville at the budget committee was talking about outputs versus outcomes. And it's remarkable to me, and to me, it fills me with pride that we're going out and crafting projects that address these things, like what happened on Fisher Road, what happened here on Liberty. I saw one state in 22 right by Riverfront Park. The crossing delays. Of course, one of the folks from the COG was killed in an accident on State Street in downtown. That motivated those delays in the pedestrian signals. So to me, just like considering we know this to be a priority of the police department this year too, to try and reduce the number of fatalities on our roads, I think it's notable that within 1 week, that many projects would just come across the desk. So I appreciate us going after it.
Yeah, thanks for that.
Any other questions, comments? If not, we'll move on to continue business, the sidewalk replacement bucket with Mr. Brandon Lucas.
Brandon, if you don't mind, I just want to maybe
no.
tee this up just to kind of give you all maybe a little bit of the bottom line up front, or what we're hoping to get at today, because this agenda item got shorted on time last week, and there's a lot to it. I think what we're really hoping to do is, after Brandon kind of runs through the program again, is get your all's high level guidance on how we ought to approach this. And is it better to find the highest single points where we have the biggest hazards that score the highest on our priority, and pick those off one at a time, and that spreads us out for more geographic area in town more likely? Or is it better to focus more effort on those areas and the problems that maybe aren't quite as highly rated, but right next to them or right near them, and sort of concentrate our focus in those areas in a sort of more compact way, which may allow us to get more things off the list. They just might not be the single highest items on the list, because we're taking advantage of the opportunity while we're in that. So I think that's really what we're kind of getting at. There's a lot of nuance to that discussion, but that's, I think, what when we get to the end, where we would like to sort of focus with you all and help us go back and refine our approach. Did I get that right?
Absolutely, Alan's exactly right.
Is that because you're saying there would be economies of scale if we can concentrate activity?
There's economies of scale, but then also connectivity. So
Okay.
one of the things I would ask
Yep.
to look at is that alleviating this hazard here on this segment, but leaving that one.
Yeah.
Do we effectively solve a community issue there, or are we? This is a approach, and you'll get further logistically, but you aren't solving necessarily the problem on that segment of sidewalk. And there is economy of scale. To be able to probably get a lower linear foot cost as we do more in a singular area.
But that's what we just want you all to have in mind as Brandon kind of goes through this, because there's a lot of good information here.
And I would just add one more thing. When you think about the very worst, the things that are just barely out of compliance, that's a huge range. And as we think about, if we say we want to tackle a corridor, the money may not be best spent on minor things that are just not quite compliant, versus maybe drawing a line where you say, here's the level of compliance that we're going to deal with from there and above, and we're not going to spend a lot of money chasing half-inch, gaps, versus leaving a bunch of 6-inch gaps or breaks elsewhere in the city.
And we'll address that too. In this is that some of the takeaways that I had from the committee the last time we met, and making sure that I'm in line with your direction as a group, because we had some takeaways on how we were assessing hazards and have applied that in a new framework in order to inform what we're selecting as locations. Okay.
Hey, Brandon, just one piece of content that I could benefit from is a reminder about when we're scheduling this in terms of the 10-year life cycle, or is the committee being asked to make decisions today that influence spending at what time frame?
So what we're looking for right now in order to develop the cost estimates and the scopes is that individual and segment approach. I don't know that we're at a scheduling point, but Alan could
Yeah,
absolutely correct me.
We're still at the point where we want to get to the recommended package, then we take that out for public input, and then we come back with the results of that to the group and then finalize it and go forward. So
Right.
we're still a ways from the actual consent. That help?
Yeah, just because, I'm thinking about there are so many variables that we were just discussing in bid pricing. But there's also variables in terms of this being an oversubscribed, program element. And there's the possibility of, this 3 million savings on that project, the, interest earnings and the bond premium from this. So there's a lot of variables. So I don't know yet if this is an appetite conversation or, a policy guide kind of conversation. So
I think we're still at the policy guidance stage, and then there's probably an appetite discussion to be had, because we're gonna flesh out more than we can afford under the current bucket. And then, prices are good, or there's opportunities to bring more funding in, then we'll have that, right?
thank you.
That's helpful.
Yeah, that's I think we kind of touched already on that. We're obviously talking about the sidewalk replacement bucket. We're not talking about the other buckets of revenue currently. So the 6.8 million in sidewalk replacement, looking for scoping.
Let me stop you there. Do we face the same sort of conversation for those buckets as well, in terms of strategically, how do we want to approach it?
I think they're a little bit different because the amount of public requests I don't think is necessarily the same. There is probably not as much. There still is components of safer crossings that there is more need, but it has not been defined as greatly by the public. That huge range, if that makes sense. Like there's definitely more need in safer crossings than we're able to attribute with these revenues, but I don't think it's been dialogue from the community that same level of disparity between what we have as a resource and what we can apply.
We did get a recommendation from the committee on the sidewalk infill at the last meeting. So we did select locations there, and it was based on scoring criteria and some of the same things, and trees versus full street improvements versus sidewalk. So there's a lot of variables that went into it. Different in some ways from this, but in many ways the same.
But there was still, a massive amount besides that we couldn't get through with that bucket. So it was really a targeted approach.
Kind of going back, right now we're trying in that develop cost estimate phase where we really, what's critical is that scoping guidance. It's going to have a huge range of where we're at and what we can accomplish. The criteria for scoring hasn't changed, but it's the 25% equity, 6% street classification, 8% across schools, transit, and parks. And then the biggest component is the hazard assessment, 45% of the criteria we utilized. And that was from the bond committee for the application here. One of the takeaways I had from the last meeting was a priority from the committee towards offsets in those larger barriers to mobility and a reduction in prioritization for spalling and fracturing, things that weren't interpreted as a barrier for somebody with a mobility device to utilize. And so then on the next slide here, this has been retooled, those top 250, to take that into consideration. So a higher focus now on the offsets between panels or the lifting. Again, this is 2,200 plus locations informed by the bond outreach, as well as historic requests for service from within our asset management database. The gray locations are locations that didn't fall as a hazard priority within the top 250. Once we reached that 250 threshold, we applied the entire equity scoring package to those, which then developed the criteria based on red as the most hazardous, descending orange, yellow, and blue within that equity framework. So going back to what Alan was talking about, we took the top 65 and we got there by leveraging some estimates that we'll do a deeper dive after this. But based on the estimates received from engineering and utilizing top 65 locations, we were able to average in and figure out at about a 90% expenditure rate, leaving a 10% threshold there. There's a lot of, this is very high level. So just to qualify, there's a lot of variance here that we haven't done a deep dive into. This could increase or decrease based on what we experience at each of these individual locations. But it's to give a concept to the committee about how far potentially the revenue stream could go versus other ways of applying the funds. On the sidewalk segments, using that same structure, using those estimates and averaging out, we were able to get to 35 locations. It's a very rough estimate. So you can see that difference between the two, where we're able to get to less places, but probably have more of an impact at that location. How we got there was an estimate on 15 locations, being up the top 15 in bond prioritization, and they stretch out through the community, as you can see. And these were the estimates that were developed for those different locations. 2169, can we go back one? I apologize. On using as an example for the committee to view, 2160 Cottage kind of gives, it's a mid-range point. And it does give a good example of what could be experienced at a location that requires remediation outside of the hazards. So sometimes, and if we go to the next, so because of prioritization, we're there because of the lift from the fir tree, right? We have a situation here where we obviously were wanting to balance the urban canopy versus the sidewalk needs, right? So we want to meet our climate action goals by retaining that tree. The solution that had been proposed is further to the south, we would reroute the sidewalk around the pole and come curbside from a property line walk, come across and down and through the driveway. This location is unique in that there is a property line to curb line shift of the sidewalk at the driveway at this location that doesn't currently meet code. We also have ADA issues here and challenges in the driveway that also don't meet those guidelines that we have from the federal government regarding ADA and accessibility. So that would be the solution presented here, is to mitigate those hazards through that shift. And that's what the 113 would encapsulate, is a driveway readjustment curb that's failing along the curb line, the tree hazard, and then reconnecting these points that we've disturbed. If that,
I don't know what's wrong with that curve, Brandon.
it's all perfect. On the segment side, we chose an approach of from Bellevue to State. It is 4 segments each side of the roadway that gave a lot of variance, from little work to a lot of work. It's a great area that I mean, from a personal standpoint, I would love to see some component or part or all of this addressed during this process. It has a lot of issues, but because of that, was able to provide a good example of what we could foresee if we choose a segment type approach, what we might experience. So the range of estimates for the east and west side on the different block faces, again, a lot of variation, and it's what we would anticipate if we choose a segment approach as well. We may have areas that, as an individual location, that ends up being the sole issue within that segment. That's a possibility, and it's reflective there then in that Ferry to State. We have a single problem, it's isolated, and that segment's able to be addressed and opened up for continuity with addressing that location. Other locations are emblematic of areas that you have a systemic issue within that block with just lots of tree root lifting, lots of whatever the challenge is, that you're going to address probably that whole 300-foot range at some increments. Maybe not wholesale full repair, but you're going to have challenges at each and every location that need to be addressed in order to remove all barriers of mobility in between the intersections.
So Brandon, when I'm going to ask this question, so you're talking about removing all barriers of mobility. So you're saying even something as small as a half-inch lift you would tackle with this approach?
No.
Okay.
So this approach is looking at, well, my takeaway from the last time was those things that would keep somebody from getting across it. It's not applying the federal standard for barriers. So it's the federal standard, to reiterate, that is a half-inch or greater crack. And most people, in reviewing that, that is not a barrier for accessibility. Most people in a wheelchair be able to navigate that. And I think even in that community, they would recognize that it is more beneficial to get rid of the hazards like we saw down Cottage, rather than expend those funds into areas that are generally accessible to most of the community. if not all.
Glad to hear that, because the other thing we face is a lot of the trip fall claims that we get are not disabled people, it's people that are just walking and tripping.
Me
over
running.
sidewalks.
It's me running.
And we're allowed to do that. We're allowed to just kind of take that approach. I know, like, when you touch a building and you do a certain amount of improvements, you have to fix all the ADA issues. So with a sidewalk, you're allowed to pick and choose.
Yes, I think you can make a case that we're not there to rebuild the entire, we're there to remove this barrier. What I would say is inside that space, we would need to be compliant. Where we chose to work, you couldn't then achieve compliance over a tree root by putting in something at a 12% running slope, right? And you couldn't do it by teetering the panel at 4% cross slope, because now you've installed something that isn't compliant, that's brand new.
And that whatever correction you make has to meet standards.
Right. Now, as part of these, sorry,
Can I make it red now?
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So we utilize the 173 number, not using the peak number for that sidewalk segment that we applied citywide, just for transparency. I think it's probably more emblematic of what we're going to experience is more problems rather than less problems within those sidewalk segments. Also, the estimate return from engineering was trying to capture a desire to retain the tree. So now that may or may not always be successful. We may or may not have all of the ability to divert or come over. There can be barriers that limit your ability to climb over a route because you have adjoining features that are immutable. You can't move them. An ADA ramp in a driveway, as an example, would limit your ability to vertically climb. You may not have right of way to horizontally move or accessibility to move horizontally from the tree.
Or a utility pole.
Right, a variety of things.
Yeah, that last picture had everything.
That's what happened.
Right.
Utility pole right there.
So I Yeah.
Depict it. I don't know.
This is a direct cost comparison on one block to give it to the committee. And so I had the benefit or drawback of that 3 of the locations on 21st actually fell inside that top 15. So engineering gave individual assessments on those, as well as a segment assessment. That's next. So that's same, if we were applying them individually, that would be the costing per location. If we took the segment approach, this is what it would look like based on those estimates. And obviously you see a very large climb in the amount of revenue it's needed to mitigate the hazards within that area. But also,
I was checking.
no, that's okay. You have to get on the individual location. All of these areas have problems, and on this approach, they are not addressed. Right? Just to be clear, it isn't that the money expended didn't resolve something. It's just taking a different look at how we're doing it. So, and Brian touched on too that there is so many locations that I feel fairly confident that within that top 250, we could throw a dart at something and it's a problem. Nobody would go there and say, oh, this doesn't need fixed, right? So just having that understanding, it starts to get a little nuance between them when you don't have, when you have so much, the 50th and the 20th don't look real different.
They're still really bad.
Right.
Councilor Tigan?
Yeah, I guess my question, and maybe you get to this later, Brandon, is what we're kind of debating here is the theory of like how much to fix at one spot, right? And in my mind, I remember the east side of Winter Street between between E and Belmont. They pretty much redid that entire strip of sidewalk. If that address means anything to you in
Yes.
terms of like saving all the sweet gums and like it was very nice when it was finished, but it took them a lot to do it. I'm curious is there also savings in mobilization going from point A to point B, as opposed to there's cost savings keeping people working within the particular area, or is that kind of just in the wash?
So I think you should anticipate as a committee that anybody that would prospectively be bidding on that, if they're seeing isolated locations that are a mile apart, 2 miles apart, is gonna influence whatever bid they return, rather than if they saw a singular project that had a lot going on in that one spot, right? So I believe if I were off the engineer estimates, it was running around an 800 linear foot cost on a segment approach, and a $1,300 linear foot cost, a little over that, for an individual approach. So you have more bang for your dollar on a segment approach, but you're going to have less. You're not going to reach as many areas. You're going to do better or more, but go less places. If that, I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, no, it does. I mean, I think that I feel like that difference between those two really is caught up in the mobilization, getting ready, tearing down. Clearly, they feel like they can get more bang for the buck if they're doing, 100 linear feet at a time rather than 40 here and 40 there.
Yeah. And winter at Belmont's not done. Just to be, we have another phase coming there. Just
Hold on tight.
yeah.
But wait, there's more.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, no.
Great.
Ward 1, it's never done.
No.
So Brandon, if you go back to this one, and so we have the segment versus the free, what type of things would be left? I mean, and this may be hard to explain, but like what would be left if you just went with the segment approach versus the individual approach versus the segment approach? So what would someone expect? Are we going to have significant
there's
barriers, or
there's some very large issues there. We could dial in on one of them if we wanted, but there's significant lifting. And this is a unique area where some of the individuals have taken it upon themselves to make their unauthorized repair types. So some of them have removed the sidewalk and put in like bricks. So they just kind of roll over. It's completely out of ADA compliance. It's one of the hazards there. But there's a significant amount of lifting. And to just clarify here, when we didn't run that out to the 65 or on that other mapping. So there is the potential that some of these other locations within that could rise that level, and depending on how far the revenue stretches, maybe some of them are addressed. But you would expect to see hazardous issues left behind if the individual approach was taken, and they could be significant, true barriers.
So I would just add one more thing. That's it's important to know. Our council policy and how we approach sidewalks is, there was a date in time which was
September 1st, 1992.
1992.
Oh, wow.
But
You just know that.
But when the council decided to, if we went out and made repairs after a certain date, it was the property owner's responsibility to deal with sidewalk going forward in the future, unless it was related to a tree. And that, you could just share that.
So currently our programs are kind of what I mentioned about like winter, where we've taken a wholesale approach there, and circling back to what we recognize internally as a hazard that's based off of that federal look of the half-inch or greater, the spalling, the fracturing, these things that may not be registered by the average person as a barrier, we quantify as a defect. And so part of the code is that a sidewalk at that tax lot has to be defect free, in order for us to turn it over if it was built after September 1st, 1992, to the adjacent property owner for maintenance. The majority of our internal programs have a real focus on that metric, to move and shift the burden of responsibility of maintenance to the property owner. Just to be clear, everything estimated here and how it's being approached does not achieve that framework of compliance. It would leave the vast majority of these locations as the responsibility of the city in order to stretch that revenue.
So it's
Is that-
defect free, but partially defect free does not put the burden back on the homeowner, so
No.
it stays with the
It
city.
needs to be fully.
Okay.
Yeah. And two, the majority of these I would suggest are going to be hazards caused by city street trees. city-owned trees, and those, according to the current version of code, are never released from our responsibility.
Counselor Brown?
Thank you. I'm trying to wrap my head around everything that you just said. So the cost burden it will no longer be for the homeowner. It's the city's now responsibility for that.
It already is.
Yeah, so Josh, it's already anything we're looking at now is our burden for maintenance responsibility. Our internal program goal has always been to shift that burden. These measures that we're taking place as a general rule will not change will not change who has maintenance responsibility, which will be us.
Mm.
There may be isolated instances where that's not the case, that the hazard stretched across. Like as an example, on the one we looked at Cottage, that upon completion with how we're moving everything and shifting it would be turned over to the adjacent property owner for future maintenance responsibility. If we had that same kind of issue somewhere else where we didn't have that shifting sidewalk and driveway issue, there's a real potential we fix the repair around by the tree, but the sidewalk remains our responsibility for maintenance because we didn't address all of the issues or what we would quantify as a defect within that.
Wow. And one final question. Director Martin, you mentioned something with council policy in 1992. Is that what you said?
So we have a council policy in place to where either the city has the responsibility for the sidewalk or the property owner does. And so it dates back to 1992 because that's when the federal rules came into effect for ADA compliance and ADA accessibility rights away. So from that point forward in 1992, all improvements had to be made ADA compliant.
Wow.
So
okay, thank you.
What we have in our city is a combination of very old sidewalks, newer sidewalks, and because the burden of cost to maintain sidewalks is so expensive, the city made a decision. That policy is, I don't think it's as old as 1992. It was back in the early 2000s, I believe, that if the city comes in and replaces all the sidewalk or does a project that leaves it defect free, the responsibility for future maintenance of that sidewalk falls on the property owner and it's no longer a city burden unless future panel issues are the result of a city street tree causing that panel to have a defect. Because it's a city street tree causing a future problem, the city would resolve that problem due to the tree. So we have a combination of sidewalks that are property owner responsibility right now and city Salem responsibility.
Yes.
Not to dive into a rabbit hole, but you piqued the attorney brain in me. Council policy, where does that stand in the hierarchy of like charter and revised code? And
it is in revised code.
It is in the revised code.
It's in the revised code.
Okay.
Yeah.
Issue resolved.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting or useful for the group to understand in those two comparison slides what the order of magnitude cost might be. Just, because 367 was the broad treatment. If we were able to achieve that standard to turn it over to adjacent property owners, is it a 3 times magnitude? Like just for context, it would be very hard for you to say. It brings every engineering bone in the body, but could you generally articulate?
So in order, it's a great question. In reviewing these areas, so in this segment approach, right, we're looking at 21st, right? If we wanted to choose that framework of returning properties, we would need to wrap all corner properties would have to be wrapped onto the side streets. You have to take them to it's a tax lot based system. So you would have to come to the alleys on each of these corner lots. It starts having this domino of scope that I believe will expand what available revenue there is inside this bucket before you meet perhaps what the goals were for this. But that's obviously not my decision. I would also say that at those points too, you're getting into for sure the ADA ramps on most of these locations, and that is an extreme cost that should be factored in. If you're looking at ADAs, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, you're probably 80,000 right off the bat that was not factored into this estimate. You haven't even addressed the additional sidewalk. So you're probably looking at where this section now is, this is real rough, but you're probably looking order of magnitude into $1 million, right? To wrap this, do all that, and don't hold me to it, please. Don't. I have no engineering bones.
I was just asking that for
So
that,
that's an excellent question.
because I think part of what you were describing when you started this conversation, Brent, that the intent that you understood from the group was about mobility.
It's about mobility
not
challenges
about
and
achieving the council.
right, and about
Oh.
one of my takeaways was getting as much as we could out of the revenue, and I think we would be moving in the opposite direction then, as far as what the public might perceive as a hazard. A lot of things that fall again under those defect ranges, like Director Martin said, would a lot of people don't perceive them necessarily as a hazard, but they need to be remediated in order to turn that property over. And we will see those complaints quite often if we're working adjacent to other issues when we're applying that framework or that metric is that why. Look over here, this is a problem. And so.
And I just add one more thing for clarity, especially for some of the new counselors. So Brandon has an annual sidewalk program that he is already doing outside of this bond program. So I should know the number because we talked about things last night. It's around $2 million, $1.5 million, $2 million a year go towards annual sidewalk replacements. And that program is based on trying to spread the money throughout the community. And so he's broken it down by neighborhood association, I believe. And so how many neighborhood associations do you hit a year?
We're probably, there's out of the 17 neighborhood associations, it takes us about a 2.5 year cycle to get all the way through with a framework that we wanted to focus more on having an impact rather than having a quick turnaround. So we want to be more impactful when we're in the neighborhood association and just addressing 5, 6, 7 locations if possible, rather than having a quick turnaround, but we're only hitting one home or one sidewalk issue and then leaving.
So he is rotating through that now with his allocation of gas tax funds, for sidewalk replacement that is trying to capture the whole city every 2.5 years. Is that appropriate?
Right, for that program, within that 2 million, there's a program.
Within that 2 million. So with that one, he's just taking the worst ones typically, or maybe he's doing some corridors, but going about doing that. When we first talked to the committee a year or more ago about how we approach this sidewalk replacement, it was pretty clear that keep that one going, but with the bond funds, use the ranking, including equity and all the other categories, and we'll take the bond funds and apply them just to the worst spots for, regardless of what neighborhood association it's in. It's just try and get the higher level one. So when we do start doing this after the decisions of this group, there will be 2 programs going, Brandon's annual program, and then this would likely be the contractor doing the bond program.
Councilor Brown?
So real quick, it sounds like to me that sidewalks are becoming more and more expensive. Would that be fair to say?
Yes.
And having said that, how do we explain all the nuances when it comes to communities? How do we explain or share this with them? Because obviously there are a lot of constituents that have concerns, and the information that's been shared today is phenomenal. It's just how do we package it to give it out to our constituents to where they can process it and know what's going on?
We've done public outreach on request to the different neighborhood associations, done presentations that kind of are program based. There's the information readily available on the website, City of Salem website. I think that it is challenging sometimes to communicate outward, depending on different people's investment in what the city's doing. And so that's a challenge. I think it's not just isolated to street maintenance, but across the board, it's sometimes hard to get that engagement or outreach unless that person is focused on that problem.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Well,
Yeah, thank you. I'm really sorry, but I have to leave for a work engagement at 1 o'clock. I don't think there's an action item related, like a vote related to this today. Chair Heron.
I think there actually is. So the question I think that's going to be put to us is our preference for a individual, like a la carte repair prioritization, or is it by segment?
I'll share my opinion that I believe that the individual repair prioritization is the better approach. It's a really difficult call because I think you could have your city crew or the hired crew in an area and essentially walk away from unrepaired areas, which is not going to make sense to people. But I also feel like, especially with the sidewalk program in the GO bond, we really need to ensure that people see it across as much of the community as possible. And I feel like the individual repair prioritization achieves that more than the segment repair would. It aches at my heart though, because I know even within my own neighborhood, within a lot of Ward 1 and other places within the city, it'll mean we're going to walk away from some segments that we should repair while we're there. But to Dr. Brown's point, I think people are going to want to see a map. And I've looked for the sidewalk repair map associated with the bond. It doesn't exist yet in my finding. But I think when it does exist, I think people are going to want to see that it's a lot of locations across the city and not just 23 segments.
Great.
Yes, yes, and yes.
Well, if you want to go, Councilor Brown, we just kind of go around the table and. No.
Tigan?
Well, we just got his
Oh, got
votes
it.
for the
Got it.
individual repair.
Oh.
Councilor Brown, want to share your thoughts?
Oh, mine is the same because I remember last time we had this similar conversation. I am about having the individual approach because it's hard to explain to someone in the city why they fix something over here and then 50 feet over there, it's undone.
Well, that may happen with the individual approach,
Yeah.
depending on what that rating is. So you may get the 8-inch lift, but the 4-inch lift 2 panels away would still remain because they've moved on to take care of everything that's 4 inches and higher in other locations. So you could still end up with that, with this single approach. Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard to find a win-win here.
I see there's the combination of both alternative, that we would at least look at situations where maybe there are a group of projects that we might do together. So I understand that in terms of communicating this to the public, you want to show that the bond was spread and addressed every area of the community. At the same time, I'm thinking we want us to maximize the benefit of the investment that we're creating. And I'm struck by the fact that if we fix the worst problems but leave, the second ones, that we may not have created the benefit that we really think is there. So I'd like to look at opportunities and weigh them. That's my other sense is that this isn't reducible to numerical criteria. I think there's some judgment involved. I think that's the reason that you come to us now, is if you can identify some places where doing more than just the worst ranking hazards would make sense. I would encourage us to be open to that.
I like that approach.
Do you think, Brandon, you could look at a spread of these segmented approaches to hit both ends?
I think there may be opportunities on these individual locations to be able to put bookends or sidebars on where the problems or resolution needs to stop. I would be concerned with that approach is that sometimes those bookends are very valuable in defining our stop point in order to address to the community, why didn't you? And so when you give that away, then it becomes difficult now because now everything became subjective, completely. And so somebody else's interpretation of how I reviewed that area is different than their interpretation. So there is an objective benefit to having a threshold established from the committee that says this is your endpoints. I think it is something that we could review, and I understand what you're indicating, and we could try our best to apply that framework. It does open, I believe, a little bit of a door there of interpretation that probably we're looking to kind of.
I understand that. I at one point in my life lived in this neighborhood, so I know there are multiple streets that one could take. It isn't just 21st, it's the route, but I also know that there's a population there that walks quite a bit, older population, so we want to be sensitive to that. We have transit routes and schools nearby. All of those things to me, would weigh toward, are we creating a route that we think is going to be used in an area that really needs a broader approach.
So I don't think there's a bad answer, whether it's your a la carte or segment, but I think because neither one of them is a bad one, I lean towards a segment approach. I go back to the map showing the top 250, and unless there's some scaling issue in the map, it really looks like there's clusters of projects that fall within that 250, and I think we may find that there's lots of segments that really address some of those top those top projects, and we can make a big impact. The second thing was, I don't know if this is even possible, but you talked about the potential to turn post-project to turn responsibility back to the property owner. It seems like if we're doing segmentation, doing segments, there's maybe a greater chance of that. Not a huge thing. And then the fourth thing I think about is sort of the optics. And I kind of land just the opposite of where Councilor Brown is, in that I think it makes a bigger impact if you're coming in and you're fixing a segment than doing that a la carte approach. I also think back to, I don't remember what it was we did in the first year where we very strictly applied the criteria, and we saw that all of the projects ended up in one area of town, and we were like, that's fine. This is the criteria that we said matters most. And so we just did it that way. And so I think, the most acute problems, the red dots, they are all kind of sort of concentrated up in Ward 1, Ward 5. That's the way that we've kind of said we want to look at things, is with these criteria. So.
It sounds like
It sounds like a splitter.
Where can you show the segment map again?
So again, I wrote a la carte, I wrote Heron as segment, I wrote Councilor Brown as segment ? And Courtright, I went 50-50.
Can you show the
Mixture.
segment map again?
Yeah, sure. So there's the segment map. So this is where you're getting a good area. And then this is more of an individual target approach. They still overlap a lot.
And that's what I was looking at, that map that has the individual target approach with the 65 locations. They really look clustered, but again, that just could be scaling on the map or something.
And one of the qualifiers still, I just want to present, this has not had a hard look. This is just applying that estimate criteria through that framework to try to figure out, because one of the things I took away from the last committee meeting was how much could we possibly get? What's the difference between the two? So I wouldn't hone in specifically on a singular location that is going to be addressed, but rather this is kind of those frameworks and the difference between them, the 2 to 1.
The concept.
Conceptually, this is how far the money goes. But they're from the same list of.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, I think to bring us to a decision, I can support the segment approach. I would caution against trying to chase after the objective of the council policy, even though that's, the wisdom given by predecessors in our chairs. The idea of trying to perfect every defect around a property in order to transfer it seems like quite, just even based on your napkin math, Brandon, doesn't seem particular wise use of this money. And I also see on where the C and the O on Commercial Street are, I believe, is that within the urban renewal area? And I would say if we have things on here that are part of an urban renewal area, they should probably be pulled off.
Yeah, good question. We can apply that.
Yeah, that's the section we
That's the section we dialogued about. It's on 200 D Street off front. We'd had a conversation that we didn't know if it was it's one of those that, in my opinion, would probably fall off just because the amount it needs from revenue in order to bring it up to compliance versus what could happen in the future in that area. It's just not, it didn't feel right, but we left it in there for transparency and honesty.
Yeah,
Yeah, there's larger context with the Front Street
Right.
issues.
there usually is with that one.
So it sounds like we're gonna
I'm-
leave the segment for now.
Yeah, I'm really sorry I have to hop, but I
Thanks
definitely
for
got the
coming.
Thank you, Paul.
rest of the group. Yep. Have a
Thanks,
good
Councilor
afternoon.
Tigan.
Thank you all.
In regards to Councilor Tigan's last comment, those projects that are in URAs, are we gonna like remove all of them? Is that part of the concern also or no?
So URAs are very specific about what projects are eligible. So what we can do, and I don't think it's a very big effort, is we can identify if there are any that are in an area and it aligns with the plan.
Yes.
And the only reason I ask is because I know there's work that needs to take place near Portland Road. So I'm not sure, how vast is that URA map? So anyway, just curious.
With Portland Road too, there is a pavement R&R job coming where we will get ramps and we will have opportunities to make some other fixes.
With
So,
sewer, right?
yeah, and urban renewal is contributing for some utility work that goes with that.
Oh, thank you for that clarity. Appreciate it.
You bet.
Did you get what you need for today at least?
I think so. I think that
I think where we're headed is a segment approach, but try to make it stretch as far as possible, right? So take a narrow, don't go too far.
basically making everybody angry.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's
Nailed it,
Yeah.
is what I heard.
Yeah, yeah.
Nailed it. Okay,
Nailed it.
thank you, Frank.
Equally
Yeah.
angry.
Equally angry.
Yeah.
So I don't see Rick in here.
I'll cover.
We're having that, okay, so federal funding impact.
Yeah, and so I kind of mentioned earlier, there's only two bond projects that have federal funding in them. They're both grant projects that come from FHWA through ODOT to us. And right now with the Gilchrist, we have funds that have been obligated. So that's basically ODOT telling us that, yeah, the feds have given us access to the money that we can reimburse you, and so you're authorized to spend for phase 2 construction. So that's why we're underway there, and for phase 3 design. So we're working on that as well. And then the Pringle Path one, we have an IGA in place for that, and we've got an authorization to begin design. So that's really the only thing I wanted to point out is with those federal funds through ODOT, we have not heard of any real issues with those particular projects and that type of funding being in jeopardy. That can always change, but our policy will remain the same as we will wait till ODOT says, yeah, those funds are in place and obligated and you're able to spend. So that gives us a sort of gateway to not get exposed and having spent money that we can't get back, or at least as best we can. There are some other projects outside of the bond, like we talked about Front Street just briefly, where we have grant funding for a study and some preliminary design on how to fix that railroad that goes down the middle of the street there. And that program is hung up, and we have not received an IGA, so we're not doing work. And I've heard that the FHWA person assigned to that program is no longer there. So there are impacts along those lines, but in general, we are not proceeding until we're sure. And that's how we're protecting ourselves from this. I don't know if there's anything you want to add there, Brian.
I don't think so, but I do have a question. So the third phase of the Gilchrist, is there federal funding still for that as well? Or will
Yes.
we have spent? Okay,
Yes.
so there could be, if there's any jeopardy there, it could be for some construction funding. on the
It's
third
possible,
phase.
yes. But at least what we've been hearing so far is that funding stream through ODOT for those type of transportation. We have seen occasional delays in IGAs and notice of funding being obligated, but we haven't heard that it's going like some of the other programs.
Thanks for the update.
Yeah, you bet.
Any questions, any other comments, any other topics? Councilor Brown?
Not for me.
Okay, well, with that,
But I do want to say, tell me your name again. You're sitting beside Mike.
Me?
Yes, sir.
I'm Bob Courtright. I'm one of the other citizen representatives on the bond committee. I live in West Salem.
Got it. Thank you. I appreciate that. I wasn't sure.
Counselor.
Great. Well, with no other business, we will adjourn the meeting.
Thank you,
Thank you.
everyone.
Chair. Thank you.